She ran in her white wedding dress through a blood-soaked, rain-soaked Seoul alleyway, barefoot, hair disheveled, heart pounding. Gunshots rang out behind her. Darkness loomed ahead. Her billionaire stepfather had sold her as collateral to South Korea's most ruthless gang. They were coming to collect tonight. But then a black sedan pulled up under a flickering streetlight. The door swung open, and the man inside, cold, motionless amidst the chaos, was the most dangerous thing she'd ever encountered. Like, comment with the city you're watching to let me know how far this story has progressed. And watch until the end, because this is just the beginning. The rain had no mercy. It came down in sheets so thick Evelyn Carter couldn't see more than 10 feet ahead of her, couldn't see the curb until her foot hit it wrong and she stumbled, went down hard on both knees against the wet asphalt. The pain shot straight up her thighs. She didn't stop, couldn't. She pushed herself back up with her palms bleeding and kept running because the sound behind her, boots, voices, the click of weapons being readied, told her exactly what stopping meant. The wedding dress caught on something. She yanked it free without looking back. 3 feet of white silk tore away and stayed on the chain-link fence. Good. Less weight. She ran faster. Seoul's Mapo district at 2 in the morning was not empty, but it was close enough. The neon spilled down from the bars on Hongdae's edges, reflecting broken and scattered across the rain-flooded gutters, and Evelyn ran through those puddles of borrowed light with her lungs already burning and her bare feet finding every sharp thing the alley floor had to offer. Broken glass. Gravel. Once, something soft and warm she didn't let herself think about. She didn't speak Korean. She didn't know this city. She had arrived 14 hours ago on a chartered flight from Chicago, had been escorted through Incheon in a black SUV with tinted windows, had been handed a garment bag containing a wedding dress and told to put it on. She'd been too frightened to ask questions. She'd been frightened for so long now that fear had become something like background noise, always present, just varying in its volume. Tonight the volume was deafening. She cut left into a narrower alley. Dumpsters lined one side, their lids rattling in the rain. A cat screamed from somewhere high above her, and she nearly screamed back. The sound of boots behind her hadn't faded. If anything, they were gaining. She didn't know how many men, 4 in the room when she'd run. Maybe more waiting outside. She'd heard them shouting in Korean at the man who'd brought her here. The syndicate's intermediary, a soft-faced accountant named Paul Chung, who worked for her stepfather and who had delivered her like an envelope to an address with no return label. She'd seen Paul's face go white when the man he was dealing with said something to his colleagues, and 2 of them started moving toward her. Whatever they'd been told she was, whatever category of transaction this was supposed to be, she hadn't waited to understand it. She'd thrown a glass decanter at the closest man's face and run. That had been 6 minutes ago. It felt like 6 years. The alley opened suddenly onto a wider street, and Evelyn burst through it and nearly ran directly in front of a moving taxi that leaned on its horn and swerved past her, spraying a wave of water up her left side. She gasped, spun, tried to get her bearings. Street signs in Hangul, a convenience store with its lights on, a bored clerk visible through the window staring at his phone. A Pojang matcha cart with its orange canopy collapsed under the weight of water, the owner long since gone home. And a black sedan, stopped at the corner beneath a street lamp that was half dead, flickering in some irregular rhythm like a dying pulse. The engine running. No one visible through the tinted rear window. Evelyn looked back down the alley, shadows moving, coming fast. She looked at the sedan. Every rational instinct she had left told her that getting into a strange car in a foreign country in the middle of the night was not a solution. Every rational instinct she had was currently losing the argument to the part of her brain that was simply trying not to die. She ran to the car. She hit the rear door with her palm, not knocking, just slamming against it, and her voice came out cracked and desperate and entirely stripped of any dignity she might have arrived in Korea with. Please, please, please hide me, please. For a long moment, nothing. Then the door opened. The man inside was not what she expected, though she couldn't have told you what she'd expected. He was Korean, mid-30s at most, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than 3 months of her Chicago rent. His hands were resting on his thighs, completely still. His face was angular and expressionless in the way that very controlled people learn to make their faces. Not blank, exactly, but locked. Dark eyes moved from her face to the alley she'd emerged from and back again in approximately 1 second. He said nothing. "There are men," Evelyn said, the words tumbling out of her too fast, too raw. I don't know who they are. I don't know this city. I don't know. Please, I just need." The boots hit the street. Behind her. The man in the charcoal suit looked past her shoulder for just a moment. His expression did not change. Then he said something. 2 words, quiet, directed at the driver through the partition, and the driver, without hesitation, put the car in gear. Evelyn barely got herself fully inside before the door swung closed and the sedan pulled smoothly away from the curb. She twisted in the seat and looked back through the rear window. The men had reached the mouth of the alley. 3 of them. One was raising his arm. She saw the muzzle flash before she heard anything, and then the rear windshield cracked in one clean spiderweb fracture but held, and then they were moving too fast and the men were already behind them in the rain-washed distance. She turned forward again. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't make them stop. The man in the charcoal suit had not moved, had not flinched, was looking at her now with that locked, measuring expression. She became aware of what she looked like: torn wedding dress, bleeding knees and palms, soaked through completely, hair plastered to her face, probably a bruise forming on her left cheekbone from where she'd hit the doorframe back in that room. She was barefoot and shaking and had just climbed into a stranger's car in a foreign country because the alternative was dying in an alley. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. Thank you." He said nothing. "Do you speak English?" He looked at her for a moment longer, then, "Yes." 1 word. His English was unaccented, or nearly so. Something faint underneath it that she couldn't quite place. "I need to get to my embassy," Evelyn said. "The American embassy. Or a police station. I need—" "The police," he said, "will not help you tonight." "You don't know what happened to me." "No," he agreed, "but I know who those men work for." He paused. "And they have arrangements with the police." She stared at him. "How do you know who they work for?" He didn't answer that. He turned to look out his window, and the motion was so deliberate and final that she understood it wasn't a dismissal. It was a boundary. There were things he would say and things he wouldn't, and he had already decided which category that question fell into. Evelyn pressed her bleeding palm against the leather seat to steady herself and tried to think. She was 28 years old. She had a marketing degree from Northwestern and a decent job at a mid-size agency in Chicago, and a mother who'd been dead for 4 years, and a stepfather named Richard Hollis, who had been kind once when her mother was alive, and who had become something else entirely after. She had been told she was flying to Seoul for a business event on Richard's behalf, something about an investment partnership, something she'd been too tired and too afraid of Richard's temper to push back on. She had been handed a dress and delivered like a package, and now she was sitting in this car, bleeding, in a ruined wedding dress, next to a man who knew things about criminal organizations and whose car had just taken a bullet without him blinking. "What's your name?" she asked. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. "Min-Jae," he said finally. "Evelyn," she said. "Evelyn Carter." He glanced at her briefly. Something moved across his face, too fast to read, there and gone. "I know," he said. The words hit her like a second gunshot. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at him and tried to find any softness in his face to anchor onto, any reassurance, and found nothing but that locked and absolute composure. "You know my name," she said. "Yes." "How?" He didn't answer. He was watching the road now, the lights of Seoul smearing past the windows in long wet streaks, and Evelyn sat in the silence of his non-answer and felt fear shift into a new shape. Not the animal terror of being chased, something colder, more cognitive. She was not saved. She had escaped one danger by running directly into another one. The car slowed. They were crossing a bridge over the Han River, the water below invisible in the dark and the rain, and on the far bank the city continued, dense and glittering. The sedan turned into an underground garage beneath a tower of glass and steel that caught the skyline's reflection in every surface. The garage gate opened without anyone approaching the car. The driver didn't speak, didn't look back, moved with the efficiency of someone who had done this route so many times, It required no thought. They stopped. The door nearest Evelyn opened from the outside. A man in dark clothing, not the heavy muscle type she'd expected, but lean and quiet and deferential in a way that was somehow more frightening. He held a black umbrella over the door opening, even though they were in a covered garage. Min-Jae stepped out first. He didn't offer his hand or tell her to follow. He simply walked toward the elevator and waited, and the waiting itself was the instruction. Evelyn got out of the car. Her bare feet touched the concrete and she straightened and stood, 6 feet from a man who knew her name before she'd told it to him, in a parking garage in Seoul in a torn wedding dress, with blood drying on both hands and nowhere else in the world to go. She followed him into the elevator. It moved upward without any of them pressing a button. Floor numbers climbed in the panel. 32, 35, 41. When it stopped, the doors opened directly into a penthouse foyer with dark hardwood floors and floor-to-ceiling windows showing the river and the city beyond, the rain still working against the glass. The lights of Seoul spread out below them like something too large and indifferent to care about what happened to individuals caught within it. Men were waiting. 4 of them, arrayed without crowding, all in dark clothing. They bowed their heads slightly when Min-Jae stepped off the elevator. Not the exaggerated bow of ceremony. Something shorter, more precise. Acknowledgement, deference. He spoke to them in Korean without slowing his walk. One of them peeled away and disappeared down a corridor. Another followed at a distance. Min-Jae stopped in the center of the main room and turned to look at Evelyn with the same measuring steadiness he'd maintained since the alley. "You need medical attention," he said. "I'm fine. Your hands are bleeding and you are favoring your left knee. You are not fine." There was no particular emotion in this, just assessment. "There is a doctor I use. He will be here within the hour." "I don't need your doctor," Evelyn said. "I need to call I need a phone." "You can use a phone after you've been seen by the doctor." "That's not—" She stopped herself, breathed, looked around the room, the art on the walls that she couldn't identify, the shelves with objects that probably cost more than her car, the windows that showed the whole city like a possession. "Is this your apartment?" "Residence," he said. "Am I a prisoner here?" He looked at her for a long moment. "No." "Then I can leave." "You can," he said. "The lobby has 2 exits. Both currently have men from the organization that shot at your car standing within half a block. My men have identified them. If you walk out of this building tonight, you will not survive to reach the end of the street." He said all of this with the same neutrality with which he might have described the weather. "So technically you can leave, but I wouldn't recommend it." Evelyn looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "Tonight." The qualifier sat in the air between them. He let it sit there and didn't soften it. She would learn in the days that followed that Min-Jae Kang did not soften things. He left them as they were and let you decide what to do with that. "I'll have someone show you to a room," he said. "There are clothes, the doctor will come. In the morning, if you want to talk, we'll talk." He started to turn away. "Min-Jae," he stopped, turned back slightly. "Why?" Evelyn said. "Why did you—" "In the alley. You didn't know me. You didn't know what was happening. Why did you open the door?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of a man figuring out what to say, the quiet of a man deciding whether to say it at all. "Because," he said finally, "they were hunting you, and I recognized the look." He walked away before she could ask what that meant. A woman appeared from somewhere deeper in the residence, late 40s, composed, wearing dark clothing that could have passed for a uniform, except it wasn't quite. She bowed her head slightly at Evelyn and gestured toward a corridor with a palm-open deference that somehow didn't feel like hospitality and didn't feel like threat either. Evelyn followed her, because there was nothing else to do. The room she was given was large, with its own bathroom and a window that looked out over the river and had been either tinted or treated with something so that the city below appeared softer, less aggressive, than it had from the main room. The bed was made with the kind of precision that suggested it was never slept in. There were clothes laid out, simple things, dark colors, her approximate size. She didn't ask how they'd known her size. She didn't ask a lot of things that first night, because she was trying to survive the night, and asking too many questions felt like it would use up something she needed to save. She showered. The water ran gray and then pink and then clear. She found the mirror and looked at herself for a while. The bruise on her cheekbone had developed into something impressive, a deep purple spreading toward her eye. She touched it carefully and thought about Richard Hollis in his study in Lincoln Park, sitting behind his walnut desk. And she thought about what he'd said the last time she'd asked him about the Seoul trip. "It's a simple introduction, Evelyn, a business courtesy. You'll be there for 2 days." She thought about the expression on his face when he'd said it. She was realizing now, standing in a stranger's bathroom in Seoul, that she had been reading that expression wrong for 4 years. She'd been reading it as impatience, as the particular irritation of a powerful man who found her persistently inconvenient. It wasn't impatience. It was the face of a man who had already made a decision and was simply managing the time until the decision executed itself. Richard Hollis had debt. She'd known that vaguely, in the way you know things your brain doesn't want to fully process. She'd heard the phone calls conducted behind closed doors, had seen men come to the house whose presence didn't match any legitimate business context she could construct. She'd filed all of it in the part of her mind where she kept things that were too frightening to look at directly. She understood now why Min-Jae Kang had known her name. She sat on the edge of the bed in the borrowed clothes and waited for the doctor, and tried not to think about how far from home she was, because if she thought about it too directly, her chest would close up and she would stop being able to breathe, and she needed to breathe. The doctor came, middle-aged, efficient, warm without being effusive. He cleaned the cuts on her hands and palms, examined her knees, checked her eyes and her cheekbone, and said something in Korean to the woman who had accompanied him, who translated into spare, accented English. No concussion, no fractures, some bruising that would take time. He left a small kit of supplies. The woman left too. Evelyn was alone. She went to the window and stood there for a long time with the city spread out below her and the rain still falling. She was looking for the exits, marking what she could see. The bridge to the west, the roads running along the river's edge, the ring of lights that was downtown Seoul. She was not a person who had experience with this kind of situation. She was a marketing coordinator from Chicago. She had a commute and a gym membership and a standing order at a coffee shop 3 blocks from her office. But she was alive. And she was thinking. And the man who had taken her in, the man who knew her name, who spoke with a quality of stillness that made rooms feel different when he was in them, had not, as far as she could tell, lied to her about anything yet. They were hunting you. And I recognized the look. She thought about that for a long time, about what kind of life produced a man who recognized the look of being hunted the way another person might recognize a familiar street. She was still at the window when she heard voices in the corridor outside her door, low, urgent, in Korean. The sound of someone arriving, more than one person, a shift in the atmosphere of the residence that she could feel even through a closed door, the way you can feel weather changing before you can see it. Then a sound she recognized even through the language barrier. Anger. Controlled, precise, but present. Min-Jae's voice. Low and flat and absolute. And then silence. Then footsteps. His, she thought. Moving away. Then nothing. Evelyn turned from the window and looked at the closed door of her room and understood that she had walked out of one trap and into something whose dimension she couldn't yet see. Something vast and complex and running on rules she hadn't been given access to. Richard had sold her to someone, and someone else had picked her up instead. The question, the terrifying, necessary question she was going to have to answer before she could do anything else, was whether that was better or worse. She didn't sleep. She sat in the chair nearest the door with her legs pulled up and watched the light change under the door frame, from dark to the pale gray blue of early morning, and she thought about her mother, and she thought about Richard, and she thought about the look on Min-Jae Kang's face when he told her he recognized what being hunted looked like. She thought about the fact that he'd known her name. She thought about the fact that despite knowing her name, despite knowing presumably who she was and how she'd arrived in Seoul and what she'd been intended for, he had still opened the car door. She thought about why. Dawn arrived slowly over the Han River. The rain had stopped somewhere in the night without her noticing, and the city was emerging from the dark in thin strips of orange and gray, the water below catching the early light and holding it differently than it had held the dark. From up here, it looked almost peaceful. Her door opened at 6:30 without a knock. Min-Jae stood in the doorway. He'd changed suits. Same quality, different color. Darker. He looked like he hadn't slept either, but it sat differently on him. Less like deprivation and more like he'd simply had no use for sleep. He looked at her in the chair, took in the untouched bed, said nothing about it. "You said we'd talk in the morning," Evelyn said. "Yes," he said. "Who are you?" He was quiet for a moment, not performing hesitation, actually deciding something. "Come have coffee," he said. "I'll tell you what I decide to tell you." It wasn't an invitation that left a lot of room, but it wasn't a command either. And in the 45 seconds she had to study him standing in that doorway, Evelyn Carter, who had learned in 4 years of living with Richard Hollis to read the difference between a man who chose not to frighten you and a man who simply hadn't decided to yet, made a decision about which category this was. She stood up. Her legs ached, her hands ached, everything ached. She followed him down the corridor toward the smell of coffee and the spreading light of a Seoul morning she hadn't expected to be alive to see. And she didn't know yet that the conversation she was about to have would change everything. That within 24 hours, men would die because of her presence in this residence. That the quiet, controlled man walking ahead of her was feared by everyone in this city except her, which made her either the most powerful person in Seoul at this moment or the most foolish. She didn't know yet that Min-Jae Kang already knew which one. She suspected, with a cold clarity that surprised her with its steadiness, that she was about to find out. The coffee was black and strong, and Min-Jae poured it himself, which surprised her. She'd expected staff. There had been staff everywhere the night before, quiet, efficient, moving through the residence like furniture that could walk. But at 6:30 in the morning, the kitchen was empty except for him, and he stood at the counter with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the elbows and poured 2 cups from a stovetop pot without asking how she took hers. He set one in front of her and sat across the kitchen island and drank his own standing up. Evelyn wrapped both hands around the cup. Her palms were bandaged now. The doctor's work, white gauze, and medical tape, and the warmth coming through the ceramic was the first thing in the last 12 hours that felt like something other than threat. She drank, said nothing, let the silence work itself out. He was watching her with that same locked quality, but something in it was different now in the morning light. Less like assessment, more like patience. The patience of a man who had learned to wait because waiting was often more effective than anything else. "You knew my name," she said. She wasn't going to circle it. "Before I told you, in the car, you said I know." "Yes." "How?" He set his cup down on the counter. His hands were, she noticed them now, in the flat morning light coming off the river through the kitchen window. The knuckles were not right, too thickened. Old breaks, healed crooked. Hands that had been used in ways that hands weren't supposed to be used. "Richard Hollis contacted an intermediary 6 weeks ago," Min-Jae said. "He had a debt. He was offering to clear it through a transfer of property." He said the last word the way you'd handle something unclean, picking it up with 2 fingers to move it out of the way. "The intermediary was connected to a network I monitor. The arrangement was flagged to me." "Flagged to you," Evelyn repeated. "Why would it be flagged to you?" "Because everything in this city that involves that network eventually comes through me." She looked at him across the counter, looked at the way he said it, not with pride, not with any particular emphasis. The way you'd say the building has 32 floors or the river runs east to west. A fact. A fact about the architecture of the world as it existed. "You run them," she said. He picked up his coffee again. "I run certain things. The syndicate. The men who were chasing me. You run the syndicate." "No," he said. "Those men work for Baek Sung-ho, a separate organization, a competitor." Something moved across his face, was brief and controlled, but there. "Hollis made his arrangement with Beck because he thought my network was less accessible. He was not wrong about that." He paused. "But he was wrong to think my network wouldn't know about it." Evelyn set her cup down. The sound of it on the stone counter was loud in the quiet kitchen. "You're telling me," she said carefully, "that you found out my stepfather sold me to a crime organization, and you decided to intercept it." "Yes." "Why?" The question sat between them. He looked at her steadily. "Because what Beck does with the women he acquires," Min-Jae said, "is not something I permit to operate without consequence in this city. And because Richard Hollis made his arrangement using financial structures that run through accounts I have an interest in." He tilted his head slightly. "And because I was in that district last night for a separate meeting that ended early, and your car passed mine when they were already chasing you." "That's a lot of becauses," Evelyn said. "Yes. Which one is the real one?" He looked at her for a long moment. She had the feeling he wasn't used to being asked follow-up questions, that most conversations he had ended when he decided they ended. "All of them," he said finally, "in different proportions." It wasn't a satisfying answer. It was probably the most honest one she was going to get. She picked up her coffee again and drank and looked out the kitchen window at the Han River turning gold in the early light and tried to organize what she knew into something she could actually use. Richard had debt. Richard had sold her. A man named Baek Sung-ho had agreed to receive her. And Kang Min-Jae, whatever he was, had pulled her out of it for reasons that were multiple and not entirely clear and possibly not entirely good. "What happens now?" she asked. "That depends on what you want to happen," he said. "I want to go home." "Chicago." "Yes." "You can fly out of Incheon within 48 hours, he said. "I can arrange documentation, transport, and a security escort to the airport. Beck's men will be looking for you, but they won't have time to cover all points before we move." He said all of this with the same quality, logistical, efficient, no particular investment in any of it. Once you're on the plane, you're out of Korean jurisdiction, and Beck has no infrastructure abroad that would concern you. Evelyn stared at him. "You can just do that." "Yes." "Why are you offering to help me?" "I already helped you," he said. "This is finishing what I started." "And what do you want for it?" Something shifted in his face, very slight, like a muscle tightening. "Nothing," he said. "Men like you don't do things for nothing." She watched him absorb that, watched him decide how to hold it. "No," he agreed. "Usually not." He picked up his cup, looked into it. "Consider this an exception." She didn't believe him entirely. She wasn't sure she needed to. She was alive and she had a potential exit, and the man offering it hadn't made any move toward her that felt like possession or threat, which put him ahead of most of the men who'd been part of her life in the last 4 years. "There's something else," Evelyn said. "Yes." "Richard?" Min-Jae set his cup down. "What about him?" "He sold me," she said. The words came out flat and clean, not tearful. She'd cried in the shower at 4 in the morning, and that was done. "He sold me like I was furniture, like I was something he owned and could liquidate." She looked at Min-Jae directly. "Is there anything you can do about that?" The kitchen was very quiet. "What are you asking me to do?" Min-Jae said carefully. "I don't know yet," Evelyn said. "I'm asking if there's something." He studied her. She didn't look away. "Go home," he said finally. "Get safe. Then ask me that question again if you still want to." It wasn't a no. She noted that, filed it somewhere precise and cold. "Okay," she said. 48 hours. "Yes." She nodded and picked up her coffee, and he picked up his, and for a strange, suspended moment, they just stood there on opposite sides of a kitchen counter in the early morning light, with Seoul going gold outside the window, and it felt almost like something ordinary. Two people having coffee, the most normal thing in the world. Then his phone buzzed against the counter. He looked at it. His face didn't change, but she was already learning to read the quality of his stillness, and this stillness was different from the resting kind. He said something in Korean, short, sharp, listened, said 2 more words and put the phone in his pocket. "I need to attend to something," he said. "Stay inside the residence today. Don't go near the windows on the south side." "What's on the south side?" "Currently," he said, moving toward the door. Men who want you dead. He was gone before she could respond. The day that followed was the strangest of Evelyn Carter's life, and she had recently spent a night running barefoot through a foreign city in a torn wedding dress, so that was saying something. She stayed, not because she had been told to, or not only because of that, but because she had nowhere else to go and the mathematics of survival were clear. She explored the residence in careful circuits, the main room with its view of the river, a library that was actually used. She could tell by the condition of the books, the way they sat on the shelves with the casual displacement of things regularly handled rather than displayed. A kitchen she wasn't supposed to use but did, finding tea in a cabinet and making herself a cup that she drank standing at the counter where Min-Jae had stood 6 hours earlier. She found, in the south corridor she'd been told to avoid, a door that was locked. She didn't touch it. She found, in a room that appeared to be used for meetings, a whiteboard covered in diagrams that meant nothing to her. Networks, lines of connection, names she couldn't read in Hangul and some she could, in English, corporate names, bank names, 3 that she recognized from Chicago Financial News. She looked at the whiteboard for a long time and then walked out of the room. There were staff in the residence. She saw them periodically. The woman from the night before, whose name she learned was Su Yeon, a young man who handled something undefined but was always near a phone. 2 security men who were always within eyeline of the main entrance. They were not unkind to her. They were also not going to let her leave. She understood the distinction. She was not a prisoner. She was a situation that was being managed. Those were different things, but from the inside they sometimes looked the same. At noon, Su-yeon brought food she hadn't asked for, doenjang jiga and rice, set on the low table in the main room with a precision that suggested it had been prepared by someone who knew what they were doing. Evelyn ate all of it because she was starving and it was extraordinary, and she sat alone afterward with the river below her and tried to think about Richard and what came next, and found she kept circling back to Min-Jae Kang's hands instead, the way they'd looked wrapped around a coffee cup, broken and rebroken, layered over with the careful grooming of a man who dressed in tailored charcoal suits and lived 41 floors above a city he apparently controlled. She was thinking about those hands when the shouting started. It came from deep in the residence, the locked south corridor. Male voices, 3 or 4 of them, and then Min-Jae's voice cutting through the rest like a blade, low and absolute, and then silence so complete it felt pressurized. Then footsteps, fast ones. The door to the main room opened and a man she hadn't seen before came through it. 40s, thick through the shoulders, a scar along his jaw that bent his beard growth wrong. He looked at Evelyn with the particular assessment of a man who had been told there was a problem in this room and was trying to establish which category of problem she was. Behind him came Min-Jae. He said something sharp in Korean. The scarred man answered without turning around. Min-Jae's jaw tightened. "What's happening?" Evelyn said. Min-Jae looked at her. "Go to your room." "Who is this?" "Evelyn." His voice was quiet, and it was not a request. The scarred man looked at her again, looked at Min-Jae, said something in Korean that came with a particular quality, not deference, something harder. And Min-Jae answered it in a tone she hadn't heard from him yet, something that dropped the temperature in the room by several degrees. The scarred man left. Min-Jae stood in the center of the room for a moment. His jacket was off. Somewhere in the last 6 hours he'd shed it, and she could see through his shirt the line of something across his left shoulder. Not quite visible, but present. The shape of a scar beneath white fabric. "Who was that?" she asked again. "Jang Tae-sung," Min-Jae said. He was looking at the door the man had left through. An associate. "He doesn't seem to like me being here." "No." "Is that a problem?" Min-Jae turned to look at her. "Not for you," he said. "Go rest. We move you in 36 hours. What were you arguing about?" "Business?" "About me." He didn't deny it. He said, "Rest," and walked toward the south corridor, and Evelyn stood in the middle of the main room with the river going gold behind her and thought about the way Jang Tae-sung had looked at her. Not with the assessing hunger of Beck's men in the alley. Something else. The look of a man who saw a structural problem and was trying to calculate the cost of removing it. She went to her room. She did not rest. The second time she heard shouting, it was past midnight. She had been awake in the chair again, the city below her doing its restless neon business, when the sound came through the walls. This time it was longer. More voices. She caught Min-Jae's once, and Tae-sung's once, and then other voices she didn't recognize. And then a sound that was brief and physical and made her breath stop. The specific dense sound of something connecting with something else. A fist, a surface. She didn't know which. Then silence again. Then a single door, closing hard. Not a slam. Controlled. The control somehow worse than the slam would have been. She waited 20 minutes. Then she got up and went to the kitchen because she needed water, and also because sitting in that chair waiting for sounds through walls was making her feel like something was happening to her rather than something she was navigating, and the distinction mattered. Min-Jae was in the kitchen. He was standing at the sink with his back to her, his shirt untucked, and when she came through the door, he turned and she saw his face and stopped walking. His lower lip was split. Not badly, a small clean cut at the left corner that had bled a little and stopped, and something around his right eye that would be a bruise by morning. They looked at each other. "You should be asleep," he said. "So should you." She moved to the cabinet and found a glass and filled it at the tap and drank half of it standing there, turned back around. "What happened?" "Internal disagreement. Tae-sung hit you." "I handled it." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her for a moment, then moved to the counter where a cloth was folded and picked it up and held it to his lip briefly, removed it, looked at it. "He thinks," Min-Jae said carefully, "that having you here creates a vulnerability. That Baek's attention on this building is a resource cost that isn't justified by—" He paused. "By whatever he thinks you represent." "And what do I represent?" "To Tae-sung? Sentimentality, which he considers a liability. And to you?" The question moved through the air between them. Min-Jae set the cloth down. "A problem I caused by acting before I thought through the implications," he said, "which is not something I usually do." He said this last part in a different register. Not quite self-criticism, not quite admission, something in the narrow space between them. "So Tae-sung is right," Evelyn said. "About the cost," Min-Jae said, "not about the solution." "What does he think the solution is?" Min-Jae looked at her steadily. "You don't want to know that." She did. She absolutely did want to know that. But something in his face, the particular quality of the steadiness, told her that he was right. That knowing would change something in her understanding of her situation, and right now she needed to keep that understanding simple enough to act within. "Can he override you?" she asked instead. "No." "Is he going to try?" Min-Jae's face did something complex and brief. "Not successfully," he said. "That's not the same as no." "No," he agreed. "It's not." She finished her water and set the glass down and stood there in the low light of the kitchen with this man who had a split lip and something complicated going on behind his locked face and 36 hours to get her out of his residence and into an airport. And she said, "Tell me something true." He raised an eyebrow, slightly. The most expressive thing she'd seen from him yet. "What would you like to know?" "Why do you have that scar?" she said. "On your shoulder. The one under your shirt." He was quiet for a moment. "Someone I trusted put a knife there when I was 23, he said. "The first time, the second time, same person, different instrument. I was 26. He said it the way you'd recite something you'd stopped letting yourself feel. I was slower to understand patterns then." "What happened to the person?" "They're not a concern anymore." Evelyn thought about that. About 23. About the first time. About the kind of world in which a person received multiple significant wounds from a single trusted source before acting on the information. "How old are you now?" she asked. 36. 13 years of being faster, she said. Something happened around his eyes. Not quite a smile. The shape that a smile left behind after it decided not to form. "Yes," he said. "Does it work, being faster?" He looked at her. The split lip, the bruising coming up around his eye. A man who ran the criminal underworld of a major city and had walked into his own kitchen after midnight with evidence of a fight on his face. Mostly, he said. Tonight it didn't. Tonight I was managing several things at once, he said. I made a calculation error about Tae-sung's current threshold. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite irritation, but adjacent. I won't make it again. She believed him. Completely. With a certainty that surprised her. She picked up her glass, rinsed it at the sink, set it in the drying rack, turned back. Get some sleep, she said. You look terrible. He blinked. The most unconstructed reaction she'd gotten from him. You're telling me what to do, he said. Someone has to. She moved past him toward the door. You've got 36 hours to get me out of here, and you're standing in your kitchen at midnight with a split lip. Rest helps. She was almost to the door when he spoke. Evelyn. She stopped, turned. The flight, he said. To Chicago. When you land, don't go back to Hollis's house. Don't call him. Don't let him know you're in the country. His voice had the same flat quality as everything he said, but there was something under it that she hadn't heard from him yet. Not concern exactly, something more structural. He'll know the delivery didn't complete. He may panic. Panicked men make different decisions than calculated ones. I know, she said. I've been living with a panicked man for 4 years. She left him standing in the kitchen. She walked back to her room and sat in the chair and watched the city and turned over the shape of that conversation like an object she was trying to understand from all sides. She wasn't going home. She'd known it somewhere under everything else. Known it since he'd said, ask me that question again, if you still want to. But she'd been trying to find the version of herself who could get on a plane and land in Chicago and move into her colleague's couch and file a police report and have that be the end of it. That version of herself didn't exist. Richard Hollis had sold her. And she had spent 4 years accommodating Richard's world, stepping around his tempers, managing his needs, shrinking herself into the shape of a daughter he didn't hate. And at the end of all that shrinking, at the end of all that accommodation, he had sold her like a piece of property he no longer had use for. She was not going to get on a plane. She didn't know yet what she was going to do instead. But the decision had a shape, and the shape of it was this. She was not done here. Morning came. She went to find Min-Jae. He was in the room with the whiteboard, standing in front of it with 2 men she hadn't seen before. The diagrams had changed, new lines drawn, some erased. He looked up when she came in. The bruise around his eye had developed overnight into something significant, a deep purpling that extended toward his temple. The cut on his lip had closed. He said something to the 2 men. They left. I'm not going, Evelyn said. He looked at her. The airport transport is arranged for tomorrow morning. Cancel it. Evelyn. Richard needs to be held accountable, she said. Not by Chicago police, not by a civil court, by someone who understands what he actually did and has the capacity to do something about it. She held his gaze. You offered me an exit. I'm declining the exit. I want to talk about what comes after that. Min-Jae looked at her for a long time. The room was very quiet. Through the window, Seoul was doing its mid-morning business, a million lives proceeding in their usual directions. And up here on the 41st floor, a man who ran the underworld and a woman who had run through an alley in a wedding dress stood on opposite sides of a whiteboard and looked at each other. If you stay, he said, it's more complicated. It's already complicated. If you stay, he said again, with a precision that told her he needed her to hear both words, Baek's attention on this building doesn't go away. Tae-sung's objections don't go away. And I cannot... He stopped. Started again. I cannot guarantee your safety in the same way I could guarantee your safety on an airport transport. I'm not asking you to guarantee it, she said. I'm asking you to let me make the choice. Something moved through his face, something she didn't have a name for yet. Not surprise, exactly. The thing that lived next to surprise in a person who'd trained themselves not to be surprised. Why? He said. Because you asked me that question, Evelyn said. Remember? In the kitchen. What would you like to know? Nobody has asked me what I want to know in 4 years. Nobody has asked me what I want at all. She looked at him steadily. I want to stay. I want to deal with Richard, and I want to understand what I'm actually inside of right now, because I think I need to understand it. Min-Jae was quiet. He turned to look at the whiteboard, turned back. Taesung will push again, he said. Harder than last night. I know. Beck's organization is applying pressure on 3 of my financial channels. It will escalate. I know that too. And Richard Hollis, he said, is not a simple problem to resolve. The entanglement between his financial structures and Beck's accounts runs through instruments that would take months to untangle legally. Illegally is faster, but carries its own costs. I'm not in a hurry, Evelyn said. He looked at her. She looked back. The city went on below them. All right, Min-Jae said. It was 2 words. Quiet. Unremarkable. But something in the room changed when he said them. Some weight shifting, some architecture rearranging itself into a new configuration. She felt it in her chest. Not comfort. Nothing about this situation was comfortable. Something else. The sensation of a door that had been partway open, deciding to commit. He turned back to the whiteboard. Come look at this, he said. She crossed the room and stood beside him and looked at the diagram. Names and lines and numbers. The circulatory system of an underground world. He reached past her and pointed to a name in the upper left corner. His arm was close to her shoulder, close enough that she could feel the warmth of it. This, he said, is where Richard Hollis's money lives. And that was when the door to the corridor opened and Jang Tae-sung walked in. He stopped when he saw them. Standing close together at the whiteboard, Min-Jae's arm extended past her shoulder. His face went through several things in quick succession, all of them controlled, none of them friendly. He looked at Min-Jae, said something in Korean, short, clipped, taut as wire. Min-Jae's arm lowered. He answered in the same register. Taesung's eyes moved to Evelyn. And in that look, unhurried, precise, assessing, she understood something she hadn't fully registered before. This man wasn't angry that she was here because of the operational risk. That was the language he used. The real problem, the one underneath all the language, was simpler and more dangerous. He saw what was happening between her and Min-Jae, saw it before either of them had named it, or even fully registered it themselves. And he had decided that it was something he was not going to allow. Taesung looked at her one more time, nodded once, emotion so precise and so empty of warmth that it functioned as its own kind of threat. Then he turned and left the room. Min-Jae was very still beside her. What did he say? Evelyn asked. Min-Jae was quiet for a moment. He said, Min-Jae said carefully, that he would handle the Beck situation himself, in his own way. Evelyn looked at him. What does that mean? Min-Jae's jaw tightened. He reached for his phone. It means, he said, already dialing, that we have about 6 hours before Taesung moves on his own and we lose control of what happens next. Min-Jae was already walking, phone to his ear, the other hand buttoning his jacket with the mechanical efficiency of a man whose body knew how to prepare for war while his mind was somewhere else entirely. He crossed the main room in 4 strides and said something sharp into the phone that made whoever was on the other end respond immediately. She could hear the tone of the reply even from 6 feet away. Urgent, clipped. Evelyn followed him into the corridor. What does Taesung handling it himself look like? She asked. It looks like dead men on both sides and a war I've spent 3 years preventing. He lowered the phone for a moment, looked at her. Go back to your room. Stop telling me to go to my room. He looked at her for a half second. Then he was on the phone again, moving toward the south corridor, and she stood in the hallway and watched him go and understood that the architecture of the morning had shifted into something that didn't include her. She went back to the main room, sat, watched the river, thought about Taesung's eyes. 90 minutes later, Min-Jae came back. He looked the same on the surface. Suit, composure, that locked in absolute quality. But she was learning to read the margins of him, the way his breathing was fractionally too controlled, the way he sat down across from her and placed both hands flat on the table between them before speaking, which she was beginning to understand was what he did when he needed to anchor himself. Taesung reached out to Beck directly, he said. Evelyn stared at him. He went around you. He opened a channel. He is proposing to deliver you to Beck himself, in exchange for Beck withdrawing pressure on my financial networks. He said it without inflection, reciting an operational fact. He believes this is the efficient solution. Remove the problem. Restore the equilibrium. The word deliver sat in her stomach like something swallowed wrong. Can he do that? She said. Can he just override you? No, Min-Jae said. But he can force me to make a choice between stopping him and managing the fallout of stopping him. They're not the same effort. His jaw worked briefly. Tae-sung has been with me for 11 years. He has his own loyalties inside my organization. If I move against him directly, it fractures things. So what do you do? He looked at her across the table. I've already moved him out of the building, told him I need 24 hours to consider his proposal. Does he believe you? No, Min-Jae said, but it buys time. Time for what? He was quiet for a moment. I'm working on that. She looked at him. At the flat light coming off the river and sitting on his face and making the bruise around his eye look worse than it probably was. At his hands on the table, still pressed flat, still anchoring. You're going to help me with Richard, she said. Yes. And Tae-sung just made that more complicated. Significantly. Because of me. Because of his own calculation about what's worth protecting, Min-Jae said. Don't absorb that as your responsibility. It is my responsibility. I chose to stay. Yes, he said. You did. He looked at her directly. And I chose to let you. So we're both in it. She held his gaze for a moment. The we in that sentence was a small thing, a short word, but it had weight. What do we do about Richard first? She said. He reached inside his jacket and produced a folded document, pages, printed, dense, with columns. He spread it on the table between them. Evelyn leaned forward. Richard Hollis has been running leveraged capital through 3 shell companies since 2019, Min-Jae said, pointing. These are all registered in Delaware, but operational through a Hong Kong banking intermediary that Baek's network controls. Richard didn't come to Baek because Baek was accessible. He came to Baek because Baek had been his banking partner for 4 years already. He looked up at her. Your stepfather has been laundering money for a Korean crime syndicate from Chicago for 4 years. The room was very quiet. Evelyn looked at the columns of numbers, at the company names she didn't recognize, at the dates running down the left margin. He's not just in debt to them, she said. No, he's been a functional partner. The debt is a deterioration of the relationship. He over-leveraged a position in a Chicago real estate fund and lost Baek's capital along with his own. Rather than absorb the loss, Min-Jae paused, just barely. He offered you as a recovery mechanism. In his mind, you were an asset he controlled. An asset, she said. I'm using his language. I know. She sat back. Something was happening in her chest. Not grief exactly, because grief implied loss of something she'd had, and she was realizing now that she'd never had what she thought she'd had with Richard, that the version of him she'd tried to maintain in her understanding of her own life was a fiction she'd been building block by block for 4 years out of pure necessity. How do you have all of this? The financial documents came through the flagged channel. My network has been watching Beck's laundering infrastructure for 18 months. Richard was a node we identified but didn't prioritize. Something moved briefly across his face. We prioritized him when his name appeared on a transfer document next to yours. She looked at him. You started tracking me. We started tracking the transaction, he said carefully. Same thing. Not quite, he said, but close enough. She looked back at the documents. 4 years. She had spent 4 years in Richard Hollis's house and his orbit and his careful management of her presence in his life. And all of it, all of the walking on eggshells, all of the managed silences, all of the times she'd told herself she was imagining how uncomfortable he was around her, how transactional everything felt. All of it had been real, more real than she'd let herself know. Okay, she said. Her voice was steady. She was slightly amazed at how steady it was. These documents, can they be used? Against him? Yes, through the right channels. Min-Jae refolded them. The question is what you want to happen to him. I want him to lose everything, Evelyn said. I want him to face what he did in some form where he can't buy his way out of it. I want... She stopped, breathed. I want there to be a record, something that makes it real, that says it happened. Min-Jae looked at her steadily. That's a specific kind of justice. Yes. It takes longer than the other kind. I know. He nodded once, put the documents back inside his jacket. Then we build the case while we manage the Tae-sung problem. Parallel tracks. Can you do both? I've run more than 2 tracks simultaneously before, he said. Something dry in it. The closest thing to a wry edge she'd heard from him. She almost smiled. Almost. 2 days passed in a rhythm she hadn't expected. Structured, almost quiet. Min-Jae was present in the residence for parts of each day and absent for others, and when he was present there was a steadiness to it that she hadn't experienced before with someone in a position of power. He didn't explain himself constantly, didn't perform calm, was simply calm in the functional way of a person who had learned that panic was a resource drain and had eliminated it from his operating system years ago. She ate with him once on the second day, a late lunch at the kitchen counter because neither of them had made it to the table. He had brought food from somewhere outside, something she didn't recognize that turned out to be mulnaengmyeon, cold noodles in iced broth, which she ate half of before she understood what she was eating and then finished all of. He watched her figure it out without saying anything. Then, "You didn't ask what it was." "I was hungry." Most people ask. "I've been running on adrenaline for 72 hours, she said. "I'm past the stage of being picky." He looked at her for a moment, then looked back at his own bowl. "My mother used to make this," he said. It came out like something he hadn't decided to say, almost past his filter before he caught it. He didn't look uncomfortable exactly, more like a man who had said something true and was deciding whether to regret it. "Tell me about her," Evelyn said. "No," he said, but without edge, just the simple wall of it. "Okay." They ate. Outside, Seoul continued. Inside, something was quietly and without announcement becoming something else. Not dramatic, not declared. Just 2 people in a kitchen eating noodles and leaving space for each other's silences. She was thinking about that, about the specific texture of sitting in silence with another person and finding it comfortable rather than threatening, when her borrowed phone buzzed on the counter beside her. The one Min-Jae had given her 3 days ago. A clean number, no connection to her Chicago life. She looked at it. Unknown number. Area code she didn't recognize. She looked at Min-Jae. "Answer it," he said. He'd already set his bowl down. She picked it up. "Hello?" Silence for a moment, then, "Evelyn." She knew the voice, had been built around that voice for 4 years, had organized her behavior in response to its moods and its frequencies. Richard Hollis sounded the way he always sounded when something had gone wrong, not panicked, because Richard didn't panic visibly, but stretched thin, a wire pulled close to its tensile limit. Her hand went cold around the phone. "How did you get this number?" she said. Min-Jae was already standing, already moving around the counter toward her. She turned the phone outward slightly so he could hear. He stood close enough that she could feel the solidity of him beside her, and listened. "That doesn't matter," Richard said. "What matters is that you're safe. Evelyn, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Whoever has you right now is dangerous, whatever they've told you." "They told me the truth," she said. "About Bayek, about the shell companies, about what you arranged." Silence on the line, long enough that she could hear him breathing. "Evelyn, you sold me," she said. "Don't." "It was a—" He stopped, started again. "The situation was more complicated than—" "Don't," she said again. The word came out very flat. "Don't explain it to me. Don't rationalize it. Just don't." You're in a dangerous situation," he said. "Kang Min-Jae is not someone who helps people. Whatever he's told you about his intentions, how do you know who has me?" Pause. She looked at Min-Jae. Something had changed in his face. He reached for her wrist. Not grabbing, just a light touch, a signal, and shook his head once. A small motion. His eyes were very focused. "Beck told me," Richard said. "He made contact this morning. He's told me that Kang is holding you to leverage against him, that you're not there willingly." "That's a lie." "Evelyn, you don't know this man. You don't know what he's capable of." "I'm beginning to," she said. What do you want, Richard? Another pause. The stretched wire quality in his voice tightened another degree. I want you to come home, he said. I have an arrangement with Bayek. If you come in, willingly, without Kang's interference, Bayek agrees to clear the debt completely. No harm to you. We go back to Chicago. Everything what? She said. Goes back to normal? You go back to treating me like an asset you manage, and I go back to pretending not to notice? She was aware of her voice doing something, not breaking, something harder than breaking. There is no back to, Richard. You ended that. Evelyn, don't call this number again. She hung up. She stood there with the phone in her hand and the kitchen very quiet around her and outside Seoul going about its enormous, indifferent business. Min-Jae's hand was still at her wrist. She was aware of it the way you're aware of an anchor. Not comforting exactly, just present, a fixed point. Beck contacted him, she said. Yes, Min-Jae said, this morning, which means Tae-sung gave Beck a direct channel to Hollis. His voice was absolutely level. This was not Tae-sung being independent. This was Tae-sung being active. What does that mean? It means, Min-Jae said, that Tae-sung is not waiting for my decision. He has already made his own. He moved away from her. 2 steps, turning, looking at the window. Richard Hollis now has a line to Beck, and the location of this building, which he's given them, because Beck already knew it, but now Hollis knows they know it, which means they can coordinate. Can Beck come here? To this building? Not directly. Not without consequences that would cost him more than you're worth operationally. He turned back to look at her. But there are other ways to apply pressure, and Tae-sung just opened several of them. She looked at him. What do we do? He was thinking. She could see it. Not frantic thinking, not the visible gears of a person overwhelmed, but the deep, very still calculation of a man running scenarios. We move, he said. Not the airport. Somewhere else. Tonight. Where? Outside the city, he said. I have a property in the mountains, north of here. It's not registered to any name connected to me. How long? Until I understand what Tae-sung is doing and can respond to it without... He paused. Without destroying 11 years of organizational structure. She looked at him. At the bruise around his eye, faded now to something greenish and yellow at the edges. At the line of his jaw and the controlled set of his mouth and the hands that were still again, at his sides, still in that particular way. Are you going to be able to stop him? She said. Tae-sung. Yes, he said. Without it costing you too much? He looked at her. Something moved through his face. Brief, complex, a weather system passing. Probably not, he said. It was the most honest thing he'd said to her yet, and she recognized it as such, and she understood that it cost him something to say it, and she didn't make him repeat it or qualify it or walk it back. She just nodded. Tell me what to pack, she said. I'll be ready in 20 minutes. They were in the car within the hour. A different vehicle, not the black sedan, but something less identifiable. A dark SUV with plates Min-Jae had exchanged himself in the garage, moving with a precision that suggested he had done this before, and not infrequently. 2 men came with them. Not Tae-sung's men. 2 faces she hadn't seen in the residence before, which told her Min-Jae had made calls during that hour she didn't know about. The city thinned as they drove north, the density of Seoul's neon and concrete giving way to the particular dark of mountainous terrain, the road climbing and narrowing, and the city falling away behind them, until all she could see in the rear window was the glow of it on the underside of the clouds. Min-Jae sat beside her in the back. He was on his phone for the first 40 minutes. When he put it away, he leaned his head back against the headrest and closed his eyes, not sleeping, but resting in some controlled way. And Evelyn looked at his profile in the passing darkness and thought about Richard's voice on the phone, and thought about Asset, and thought about 4 years, and thought about her mother. Her mother had married Richard when Evelyn was 22, had been dead by 24. An accident. A real one, Evelyn had always believed. Now in the dark of an SUV on a mountain road in Korea, she let herself consider whether that belief had been correct, and found she couldn't get a clean answer. The question opened something in her chest that she shut quickly and firmly, one problem at a time. The property was not what she'd expected, not a compound or a fortress or anything that announced its function. A traditional Korean house, Hanok style, low and dark roofed, tucked into the shoulder of a slope with pine trees crowding three sides of it. Inside, low furniture and paper screens and a heating system built into the floors that made the whole structure feel like something that was quietly alive. One of Min-Jae's men disappeared into the perimeter. The other took a position near the entrance without being told to. Min-Jae moved through the house, turning on lights. Low ones, warm and indirect. He seemed to know where everything was with the ease of someone who had been here often enough to have a body memory of it. Evelyn stood in the main room and felt the mountain quiet pressing in from outside. No city noise, no traffic. Rain had started again at some point during the drive, and she could hear it on the roof, patient and even. "How long have you had this place?" she asked. 12 years, he said, from somewhere in the kitchen. "My father never knew about it." She waited. When he came back into the room, he was carrying 2 glasses of water, and he handed her one without ceremony. "He's dead?" she asked. "Yes," Min-Jae said. 4 years. "Who ran things before you?" "Him," Min-Jae said. "And before him, his father." He sat down. "It's a long line of men making the same choices for different stated reasons." "And you," she said. "What's your stated reason?" He looked at her. "Control," he said. "If someone is going to run this city's underground, I'd rather it be someone who has rules." Something shifted in his face. "My father had no rules, just appetite." "What happened to the people around him? The ones caught in the appetite?" He was quiet for a moment. "Many things," he said. "None of them good." She thought about that. About a boy growing up inside that. About where you learned to be still when everything around you was in motion. When stillness was the only thing between you and being consumed. They sat for a while. The rain worked on the roof. One of the paper screens showed the shadow of the pine trees moving in the wind outside. A shifting dark geometry. "Min-Jae," she said. "Yes." "When Tae-sung moves, what's the actual plan? Not the general answer, the specific one." He looked at her for a long moment. "There are 3 people in my organization," he said carefully, "who will not follow Tae-sung regardless of what he offers them. I need to get to them before he does. Secure their positions. Remove Tae-sung's access to the financial channels he needs to operate independently." He paused. "And I need to do it without him knowing I'm doing it." "How long does that take?" 48 hours, if nothing goes wrong." "What goes wrong?" "Tae-sung realizes what I'm doing and moves on Baek directly, trades information for operational cover." He said it evenly. "If he does that, Baek knows exactly where we are. And the resources Baek can bring to a mountain location are different from what he can bring to a city building." "More dangerous out here," she said. "In some ways, fewer witnesses, fewer complications." He looked at the window. "More controllable for both sides." She absorbed that. "And you're here instead of in the city handling the 48 hours because Tae-sung put a tracker on the black sedan," he said. "My men found it an hour before we left. He knew we'd run if I identified his channel to Baek. He wanted to know where we went." He looked at her steadily. "This car is clean. This location is unregistered. We have 48 hours before he can find us through other means." "Other means?" "He knows the people I trust," Min-Jae said. "Eventually one of them will say something, even without intending to. That's how information moves." She stared at him. "So the people you most trust are also the risk." "Yes," he said. "That's always true." She thought about that. About the specific texture of a world in which trust and threat lived in the same person. She thought about Min-Jae at 23 with a knife in his shoulder and the hand that put it there belonging to someone he'd believed in. "Have you slept?" she asked. "Some." "When?" "In the car." "That's not sleep." "It's enough." She looked at him. His eyes were slightly underlit, the particular quality of someone running on will past the point where the body wanted to be running. "You can sleep here," she said. She stopped. "I'll be here." He looked at her. Something in his face that she was still learning to read. That narrow space between what he thought and what he said. The gap where most of him lived. "I'm fine," he said. "I know you are," she said. "Sleep anyway." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he looked away, at the paper screen with its moving shadows. 2 hours, he said. "Then I need to make calls." 2 hours, she agreed. He stood, moved toward the corridor, paused. "There's a room at the end," he said, without turning around, "if you want to try to sleep." "I will," she said. He walked down the corridor. She heard a door, heard the specific silence of a space that had just been occupied, settling around its new inhabitant. She sat for a while longer with the rain and the shadows and the glass of water Min-Jae had given her. Then she picked up the borrowed phone and looked at it for a moment and put it down. Then she picked it up again. She opened the recent calls. Richard's number, or rather, the number Richard had called from, unknown, probably a burner, was at the top. She looked at it for a long time. Then she dialed it. It rang twice. "Evelyn?" Richard's voice, alert immediately. He'd been waiting. "Tell me something," she said. "My mother." Silence. "Tell me the truth about my mother." The silence stretched. Outside, the rain fell on the mountain. Inside the house was warm and paper-screened and entirely quiet, except for her own breathing and the terrible silence coming through the phone from a man in Chicago who had just been asked a question he'd spent 4 years hoping would never come. "Evelyn." "Tell me," she said. "Was it an accident?" And Richard Hollis, who had sold his stepdaughter to a crime syndicate and was currently coordinating with a Korean crime lord to get her back, not for her sake, but for the terms of a debt, said nothing. For 6 full seconds, he said absolutely nothing, and the nothing was the answer. Evelyn lowered the phone, did not hang up, just lowered it to her lap and sat with what she now knew and felt it move through her body like a current, cold and systemic, touching everything on its way through. Her mother had not been in an accident. The rain fell. The pine trees moved. The house held her in its quiet. She was sitting there, still, rigid, the phone in her lap and the call still open, and Richard's voice coming from it in a thin strand, saying her name in that stretched wire tone, "Evelyn, Evelyn, listen to me." When she heard from outside the front of the house the sound of gravel under tires. Not Min-Jae's men. They were on foot, on the perimeter. This was a vehicle, more than one. She stood up. Her legs were unsteady, and she made them steady by will alone. She crossed to the corridor and called his name, not loud, just enough. His door opened before she finished saying it. He came out fully dressed, fully alert, phone already in his hand, and she understood that he had not been sleeping at all. "How many?" she said. He was already at the window, not standing in front of it, but angled to one side, looking out through the edge of the screen. 3 vehicles, he said. His voice was very quiet. 6 men minimum. Tae-sung. "No," Min-Jae said. He turned to look at her, and his face was doing something she hadn't seen on it before. Something that wasn't quite fear, but was in the same family of things. "Baek." "How did Baek find us? You said 48 hours. I said 48 hours if nothing went wrong." He was moving already, toward the back of the house, speaking quietly into his phone in Korean. Someone talked. "Who?" He stopped at the back door, turned to look at her, and she saw it on his face before he said it. The thing that had been behind his eyes since the moment she'd said 2 hours. Sleep, and he'd walked down the corridor. The thing he'd been sitting with in that dark room while she'd sat with her phone and her dead mother's truth. Tae-sung told Baek directly, Min-Jae said. He gave him the location. A pause that lasted exactly 1 second. He also told Baek something else. He told him that the reason I didn't put you on a plane is because I have a personal attachment that is overriding my judgment. His jaw was very tight. And Baek is here not just to collect you. He's here because Tae-sung told him that taking you is the only way to break me. The house shook slightly. Not physically, but in the way a space changes when the danger outside it becomes specific and close and no longer theoretical. "And is he right?" Evelyn said. Tae-sung. Min-Jae looked at her. In the low warm light of the hanok, With the rain falling outside and the sound of engines cutting off and men moving in the gravel, he looked at her the way she imagined he'd looked at very few things in 36 years of being alive in the world he was alive in. "Yes," he said. Then the front door came. The front door came off its frame. Not kicked, taken. Methodically. Hinges separated with a tool that knew what it was doing. The whole panel lifted and set aside in a motion that was almost careful, which was worse than kicking. Kicking was rage. This was procedure. Min-Jae pulled Evelyn through the back of the house with one hand, his other hand already holding a gun she hadn't seen him produce, moving without hesitation through the dark kitchen and out the rear door into the rain and the pine trees and the mountain dark. Behind them she heard voices. Korean, multiple, the flat tones of men conducting a sweep rather than a search. They weren't panicked, they expected to find them. Outside, the air hit her like cold water. Rain immediately in her hair, her face, soaking through the clothes she'd packed in 20 minutes from a life she no longer recognized. The ground was pine needles and wet soil, and she slipped once, and Min-Jae's hand tightened on her wrist, and she didn't go down. They moved uphill. Into the trees. She couldn't see more than 4 feet ahead of her. "Where are your men?" she breathed. "Chula's east," he said very low. "Haven't heard from Dong-hyun." "What does that mean?" He didn't answer, which was its own answer. They stopped behind a pine tree that was wide enough for one person. He pressed her against it with one arm across her shoulders and looked back down the slope. Through the rain and the dark, she could see the lights of the hanok, warm, domestic, completely indifferent to the men moving through it. 3 figures visible through the paper screens, moving slowly, looking. His phone buzzed against her shoulder. He had it in the hand that was across her, and he read the screen without moving the arm. "Chul has eyes on 2 of them from the east side," he said. Almost no voice, just shaped breath. "There are 4 inside, 2 on the perimeter. 6 total." "You said 6 minimum." "Yes." "What's the maximum?" He looked at her. In the dark and the rain, his face was difficult to read, but she'd been learning it for days now, and she could see that he was doing the thing. The deep, still calculation. Running numbers. 10, he said. She breathed, in, out. "Okay," she said. "What do we do?" "We can't go down," he said. "The road is covered. Chul can create a distraction on the east side, but they'll know what it is within 30 seconds. So we go up. The ridge." He was already looking at it, a shape in the dark above them, a line where the trees thinned against a slightly lighter sky. "There's a maintenance road on the other side, old logging track. If Chul holds them long enough, I can get you to it." "And you?" "I come after." "That's not a plan," she said. "That's you staying behind." "Evelyn." "No." She grabbed the arm he had across her shoulders, felt the muscle under it, the tension held and controlled. "That's not the plan. We go together or I don't go. If we both run, they'll take us both." His voice was still quiet, but something in it had acquired an edge. Not anger, something tighter than anger. "I can hold them at the ridge long enough, with one gun against potentially 10 people," she said, "with one gun and high ground and 11 years of knowing how these men think." Min-Jae. Evelyn. His face was very close to hers. She could feel his breath, rain between them. "I need you to trust me right now. Not later. Now. Can you do that?" She looked at him. In the dark and the rain and the pine trees with Beck's men 40 meters below them, moving through the house that had been warm an hour ago. "Yes," she said. "Then go up. Stay in the trees. When you hit the ridge, go left. The maintenance road starts at a concrete marker with a reflective strip. You'll see it even in this dark. Get to the road and wait." He pulled the arm back. His hand was on her face for just a moment, cupping her jaw, his thumb at her cheekbone, a brief thing, specific and complete. "Wait for me." "How long?" 20 minutes, he said. "If I'm not there in 20 minutes, take the road downhill. It hits the main highway in 4 kilometers. Flag any vehicle." "I'm not leaving without you." "You are," he said, "because if they take you, it all means nothing. Do you understand that? Everything I'm doing right now means nothing if they take you." The hand on her face pressed slightly. Not hard, just present. Go." She went. She moved uphill through the dark and the rain and tried to keep the sound of her breathing from becoming the loudest thing in the forest. The pine needles were slick under her feet. Her ankles turned twice on root systems she couldn't see. She kept moving because stopping was the thing that would kill her, and she had gotten very clear in the last 6 days about the difference between things that might kill her and things that definitely would. Behind her, from the direction of the east side of the house, she heard Chul create his distraction. She didn't know what it was. A sound, a shot, something. But she heard voices react to it, shouts, movement. She didn't look back. She went up. The ridge took 11 minutes to reach. She counted because counting was something to do with the part of her brain that kept wanting to stop and process what was happening, and she couldn't afford that part of her brain right now. The concrete marker was where he'd said it would be. Reflective strip, dull in the rain but present. She stood on the ridge with her hands on her knees and breathed. From here she could see more than she'd been able to see from the trees. The hanok below with its lights, the dark shapes of vehicles on the gravel. Movement. 3 figures moving uphill, flashlight beams cutting irregular lines through the rain. They'd seen her, or heard her, or Chul's distraction hadn't held long enough. 3 men coming up the slope, moving faster than she had because they weren't operating in the dark. They had lights, and they knew the terrain or didn't care about it the way she did. She looked at the maintenance road, looked at the slope. She looked for Min-Jae and couldn't find him in the dark. 20 minutes. She didn't have 20 minutes. She had maybe 4. She thought about the concrete marker, about the maintenance road and the 4 kilometers to the highway. She thought about what Min-Jae had said. If they take you, it all means nothing. And she thought about what she knew now, what she'd learned in the phone call she'd made while he was pretending to sleep, about her mother and Richard and the shape of the last 4 years. She thought about being an asset, about being delivered, about being something that happened to rather than something that happened. And she picked up the concrete marker. It was heavier than it looked, a solid post, maybe 10 kilos, buried in the ground, and she had to work it loose with both hands, twisting and pulling while the flashlight beams got closer and the rain fell and her arms shook with the effort. It came free with a sucking sound from the wet earth. She moved to the edge of the ridge, waited. The first man came over the ridgeline with his flashlight sweeping and didn't see her until she was already moving. She swung the post horizontal and low, and it caught him across the shins, and he went down hard, flashlight spinning away into the dark, and he made a sound that was mostly surprise and then mostly pain. She ran, not down the road, laterally along the ridge, moving in the dark without a light because she didn't have one and because the dark was the only advantage she had. The second man had seen her. She could hear him. He was faster than her and younger than her, and in 30 seconds he was going to close the distance, and she knew it, and kept running anyway because stopping was still the thing that would kill her. A shot. Not at her. To her left, from somewhere below the ridgeline. 1 shot. The man behind her checked. Just a fraction. Just enough. And she ducked behind a boulder that was barely large enough to matter and pressed herself against the wet granite and tried to disappear into it. Silence for a moment. Rain. Then footsteps. Different ones. She knew them. Min-Jae came over the ridge at a run, which was the first time she'd seen him run, and it had the same quality as everything else he did. Economical, no wasted motion, his body doing what it needed to do without commentary. He saw her behind the boulder in about 1 second and changed direction and came to her, and she stood up. He was bleeding. Left side, something above his ribs. She couldn't see it clearly, but she could see the way he was holding that arm, slightly forward, protecting the side. "You were supposed to wait," he said. His breath was faster than usual, not ragged, just faster. "There were 3 of them." "There were 2, he said. "I had the 3rd. "I didn't know that." "No," he said. "You didn't." He looked at her, at the concrete marker she was still holding, absurdly, in both hands. Something happened in his face, not quite the shape a smile left behind this time. Something more than that. "Put that down." She put it down. "How bad?" she said, looking at his side. "Not bad." "Min-Jae?" "It's a graze," he said. "Ribs are intact." "It's not bad." She wanted to push it, didn't. Tactical decision. "Where are the men?" 2 down on the east slope. Chul has one. The three up here are, he assessed quickly. She watched him do it, watched his eyes move across the terrain with the speed of a man reading something he knew how to read. Temporary. They'll recover. We have maybe 8 minutes before they're a problem again. And the others? The ones still at the house? Coming up, he said simply. So we run. Yes. They ran. Down the other side of the ridge into the dark that was marginally less dark because dawn was coming somewhere behind the clouds. The maintenance road under their feet now, rutted and overgrown but solid enough. Min-Jae was slightly ahead and slightly off stride, and she could hear it in the rhythm of his footfalls, compensating for the side, not dramatically but enough. She matched his pace, didn't comment. Behind them, on the ridge, voices. Then a shot. Then 2 more, random, no target, frustration rather than precision. They ran. The 4 kilometers felt like 20. Her lungs were burning by the 2nd kilometer, and she didn't say anything, and he didn't say anything, and the rain fell, and the road went downhill in a way that helped their legs and hurt their knees, and she focused on the sound of his breathing beside her because it was the thing that told her he was still there. At the 3rd kilometer, he stumbled, not badly. His right foot hit a rut, and he lost the stride and caught himself on one hand against the road surface, was back upright in 2 seconds. But she'd seen the way his left arm stayed in, protected the side, saw the way he breathed through the recovery. "Give me the gun," she said. "What?" "You're favoring the left side. Your draw is slower. Give me the gun." "You don't know how to—" "Point and pull," she said. "I know that much. Give it to me." He looked at her. In the dark and the rain at 3 in the morning on a logging road in the mountains outside Seoul, this man who ran the criminal underworld of a major city looked at her for a long moment. He gave her the gun. It was heavier than she expected. She held it the way she'd seen people hold things in situations like this. 2 hands, and it was not graceful, but it was functional, and they kept running. The highway appeared like a hallucination. Just there suddenly, asphalt and painted lines, and the distant lights of a truck moving away from them in the wrong direction. She made a sound she hadn't planned to make. Something released in her chest. Min-Jae was on his phone before they hit the road, talking, fast Korean, while she stood on the highway shoulder with rain in her face and the gun still in both hands and tried to remember how to stand still. Everything in her body was still running, her heart especially. He hung up. "Chul is 40 minutes out." 40 minutes, she repeated. "Yes." He looked at the road, at her hands on the gun. He reached over and took it from her without speaking, checked it once in a motion so practiced it was almost invisible, holstered it. "Come here," he said. She looked at him. "You're shaking," he said. "Come here." She crossed the 2 feet between them, and he put one arm around her, the right one, not the side that was bleeding, and she pressed her face against his shoulder and breathed, just breathed. The rain fell on them both, and the highway was empty in both directions, and the mountain rose dark and vast behind them, and she breathed. "Your side," she said, into his jacket. "I know. It needs to be looked at." "I know. Are you going to be difficult about it?" "Probably," he said. Something moved through her that was almost a laugh. Almost. She pulled back far enough to look at him, his face in the thin, early light. The old bruise fading, the cut on his lip healed, and now this, the held tension around his ribs. "Taesung told them where we were," she said. "Yes." "What happens to Taesung?" Min-Jae's jaw was very tight. "I handle that when we're back in the city." "How?" He looked at her steadily. "You don't need the details of that." "I know I don't need them," she said. "I'm asking anyway." He held her gaze. "He loses everything," Min-Jae said. "The position, the access, the resources, all of it." A pause. "And if he makes it difficult, he loses more than that." She understood what more than that meant. She didn't look away. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he repeated, like he'd expected an argument and was recalibrating. They stood on the highway shoulder and waited in the rain. Chul arrived in 37 minutes, alone in a vehicle that was not registered, driving with the particular controlled urgency of a man who had been given a set of facts and was acting on them without requiring more context than he'd been given. He looked at Min-Jae's side as he got out of the car. Min-Jae said something in Korean. Chul said something back that had the quality of objection. Min-Jae said one more thing and got into the rear seat. Evelyn got in beside him. They drove back towards Seoul. The city appeared gradually. First the glow on the undersides of clouds, then the first outlying districts, then the density increasing as the sun came up somewhere behind the overcast sky, the light changing from black to gray to the particular flat white of a morning that wasn't going to clear. She was watching Seoul come back at them through the rain-streaked window when Min-Jae said quietly, "You could have taken the road." She looked at him. "When the three men came up the ridge," he said, "you could have taken the maintenance road. Started running. You had maybe a 90-second head start on them." "I know," she said. "Why didn't you?" She thought about how to answer that, about the concrete marker in the wet ground and the way she'd calculated the distance of the flashlight beams and the number of minutes she had. "Because I was done running," she said. "I've been running from things for 4 years, from Richard, from the situation I was in, from my own understanding of what was happening around me." She looked at him. "I didn't want to run anymore." He looked at her for a long time. The city outside the window getting denser, brighter, the morning traffic beginning its slow accumulation. "You hit a man with a concrete post," he said. "Yes. Oh, on a mountain ridge in the dark. He was in the way." Something happened in Min-Jae's face, all the locked and managed composure that was his fundamental architecture, and underneath it, this, something warm and ungoverned and completely uncharacteristic breaking through for just a moment before he brought it back under control. "Yes," he said. "He was." They reached the city properly as the morning completed itself. Gray and wet and vast, Seoul going about its enormous business without any awareness of or interest in the specific human drama that had played out in its mountains through the night. Chul drove without being directed. He clearly knew where he was going, which meant Min-Jae had given him a destination by phone on the ride. It wasn't the penthouse tower, different part of the city, older, more dense, a neighborhood where the buildings were lower and closer together, and the streets had the particular texture of places that had been continuously inhabited for a long time. Chul stopped in front of a building that had no identifiable signage and a door that required a code, and Min-Jae entered the code with his left hand and moved slightly wrong doing it, and she saw the wince he almost entirely suppressed. Inside, a staircase. 3rd floor. A room that had the character of a space that was used for purposes rather than for living. Functional furniture, medical supplies visible on a steel shelf, the kind of lighting that prioritized visibility over atmosphere. A woman was already there. 50s, compact. The manner of someone who had been doing a specific job for a long time and had stopped having feelings about the variety of things that came through the door. She looked at Min-Jae's side, said something in Korean. He answered. She answered back with what was clearly a professional contradiction of whatever he'd said. She went to work on his side. Evelyn sat in the chair across the room and watched. The wound was a graze the way a car accident was a minor inconvenience. Technically survivable, definitely not fine. The woman cleaned it with the efficiency of someone who had processed a great deal of damage and found efficient processing to be its own form of respect for the damaged. Min-Jae sat without moving. His face was set in that controlled quality, and he looked at the middle distance and breathed with deliberate evenness, and Evelyn watched his jaw and the line of his throat and the way his hands rested on his thighs, perfectly still, while someone worked on his side. "Min-Jae," she said. He looked at her. "After this," she said. "Taesung, Beck, Richard." She held his gaze. "What's the order?" He thought for a moment. The woman continued working. Rain on the windows. "Taesung first," he said. "He's the internal fracture. If I don't close it, everything else is unstable." "How?" "I have a meeting with the 3 senior men who won't follow him. It was set for this morning. We keep it." He paused as the woman did something with the wound that required him to breathe carefully for a moment. "We formalize his removal, make it organizational rather than personal. And if he doesn't accept it, he won't have a choice." "And Baek?" "Beck loses his leverage when Taesung is gone and the deal he was promised disappears with him." His voice was measured. Beck is pragmatic. He'll negotiate a different arrangement, one I control the terms of. And Richard? Min-Jae was quiet for a moment. The woman applied a dressing and said something, and he said something back, and she moved away to put things back on the shelf. Richard, he said, is going to call you again. I know. When he does, Min-Jae said, I need you to answer. She looked at him. What are you going to do? Give him something to believe, he said. Let him think the terms have changed, that I'm willing to negotiate, that the situation is in flux, that there's a window for him to move his assets before we move against him. You're going to make him show us where the money is. He'll move it if he thinks it's at risk, Min-Jae said, and when he moves it, we'll see the full architecture, all of it, not just what we have. He looked at her steadily. It's the difference between a partial case and a complete one. You said I wanted a record, she said, something that makes it real. Yes. This gets you that. Everything, he said. Every shell company, every transaction, every connection to Bake, and every other arrangement he's been running. All of it documented, and with enough corroboration that even a compromised system can't bury it. He held her gaze. Is that what you want? She thought about her mother. About 6 seconds of silence on a phone in a mountain house while rain fell. About the specific quality of a non-answer that was still an answer. Yes, she said. He nodded once. The woman came back, said something brief to him, put her supplies away and left the room without speaking to Evelyn, which was fine. Evelyn hadn't needed her to. Min-Jae pulled his shirt back down with the careful movement of a man relearning the range of his own body. He looked at her across the room. There's one more thing, he said. Tell me. Tae-sung, he said. He told Baek that my judgment is compromised, that what I feel for you is a liability. He said what I feel for you with the same directness with which he said everything else. No softening, no reframing, just the fact of it, placed between them. He's not wrong that it's changed my calculations. He's wrong about what that means. She held very still. I don't know what it means either, he said. Completely, but I know it's not what he thinks it is. It's not weakness. He looked at her with that absolute steadiness. I don't know how to do this. Whatever this is, I don't have a framework for it. Neither do I, she said. You're afraid of me, he said. Sometimes. Less than I was, she said. Less every day. Something moved through his face. He looked away from her, toward the window, toward the rain on the glass and the city behind it. This is going to be dangerous, he said. Today, tomorrow, however long this takes. I know. People are going to try to use you against me, the way Tae-sung did. I know that too. And you're still... Yes, she said, before he could finish. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. The rain worked on the glass. Somewhere outside in the city, a normal Monday morning was assembling itself. Commuters, coffee, the entire apparatus of lives that didn't involve mountain ridges and concrete markers and men with guns. His phone rang. He looked at it, showed her the screen. Unknown number. Same area code as the night before. Richard. She looked at the phone, looked at Min-Jae. He held it out to her. She took it, felt its weight, felt what was on the other side of it. Richard's voice, Richard's calculation, Richard moving his chess pieces around a board he thought he still controlled. She thought about the complete case, the full architecture, every transaction, every shell company, every connection made visible and permanent and beyond the reach of money or influence to erase. She thought about her mother. She answered the call. Richard, she said. Evelyn. His voice immediately, alert, calibrated, doing what Richard Hollis's voice always did, which was manage. I've been trying to reach you. I was worried. I know, she said. I'm fine. Where are you? Are you still with... I'm still here, she said. But the situation has changed. She looked at Min-Jae, who was watching her with that absolute stillness, giving her nothing but presence. Min-Jae is willing to talk about terms. He says there might be an arrangement. Silence on the other end. She could hear Richard processing, calculating, the sound of a man who thought he was winning, moving his assessment one tick forward. What kind of arrangement? He said. You should move the capital first, she said. He says the accounts connected to Beck are exposed. If you move them before the end of today— Where? Richard said. Faster now. The wire pulled tighter. Evelyn looked at Min-Jae. He gave her a number, low, calm, a string of digits that meant nothing to her and everything to the network that would be waiting on the other end when Richard Hollis's money started moving. She repeated it into the phone, and the trap closed. She didn't hear it close. There was no sound, no confirmation, nothing dramatic. Just Richard saying yes, all right, yes in that stretched voice and the click of the call ending and the phone in her hand in the morning outside the window. Min-Jae's phone was already at his ear. He said 4 words in Korean, listened, said 2 more, and hung up. It's enough, he said. What he sends in the next hour will be enough to build everything we need. She set the phone down on the table beside her chair. And then, she said, then I have a meeting with 3 men, he said, about Jang Tae-sung. He stood. The movement was carefully managed. She could see the adaptation, the slight favoring, but he was upright and he was steady. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair where he'd set it and put it on and straightened it with 2 small, precise motions. She stood too. I want to be there, she said. The meeting. He looked at her. Not in the room, she said. I know I'm not in the room, but I want to be there, where I can hear how it goes. He held her gaze for a moment. Somewhere in the building below them, she could hear the city filtering up through walls and floor, that vast, indifferent hum of a million lives proceeding. All right, he said, the same 2 words from the whiteboard room, 3 days and a lifetime ago. The same small shift in weight. He walked toward the door. She followed. And behind them, on the table, Richard Hollis's money was already moving, through channels and intermediaries and across invisible borders, leaving a trail as clear and bright as wire under tension, every step of it exactly where Min-Jae Kong needed it to be, documented and witnessed and beyond any power in the world to. Richard Hollis moved $4 million in the first 40 minutes. Min-Jae's man called it in while they were still in the car heading back toward the city center. A brief exchange in Korean, numbers read aloud, Min-Jae listening without expression and then saying 3 words and hanging up. He told her the amount without her asking. Is that enough? She said. It's a start, he said. He'll move more when he thinks the first transfer worked, when he thinks the arrangement is real. He was looking out the window, the city passing. We wait. She waited. The meeting with the 3 senior men happened at 9 in the morning in a room she wasn't in, on the 2nd floor of a building in Yeouido that looked from the outside like an unremarkable financial services office, which it was, among other things. She sat in a smaller room off the corridor with Chul standing near the door and drank green tea that someone had brought her without being asked, and listened to the muffled cadence of voices through the wall. She couldn't hear the words. She could hear the rhythm. Formal, controlled, the architecture of a meeting that was following a structure someone had designed in advance. Min-Jae's voice once, at length. Silence. 2 other voices in sequence. Silence again. Min-Jae once more, shorter. Then nothing for a while. Then a sound she hadn't expected, something physical, brief, the particular density of a human body making contact with a surface that wasn't expecting it. A chair, maybe, or a wall. Then Tae-sung's voice. She hadn't known he'd be there. She gripped the teacup. His voice was doing something she couldn't fully read through a wall and a language barrier. Not shouting, but pressurized. A voice with something behind it that had been held in for too long and was now at the forward edge of containment. She heard her name in it. The syllables of it clear even through the wall, Carter. And then something else, longer, directed at Min-Jae. And then Min-Jae's voice coming back at him, and the difference between the 2 voices was the difference between a fire and a controlled burn. Tae-sung was burning. Min-Jae was the thing that had decided where the fire stopped. Silence. Then the sound of a door. Then footsteps in the corridor, and the door to her room opened and Tae-sung was there. He wasn't supposed to be. She could tell that immediately from the way Chul moved. 1 step forward, hand going inside his jacket. But Tae-sung wasn't looking at Chul. He was looking at her. He looked the way a man looks when the thing he'd bet on has finished not paying out, not destroyed, because men like Tae-sung didn't get destroyed by single events, but something had moved in his face. Some reconfiguration had happened in the room next door, and it was visible in the way he stood in the doorway. He looked at her for a long time without speaking. She looked back. "You're not what I thought you were," he said. His English was accented, but exact. She didn't answer that. "I thought you were a liability," he said, a weakness he couldn't see in himself. He was speaking carefully, choosing. "I was wrong about what you are." "What am I?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. His jaw moved slightly. "Dangerous," he said, and it wasn't an insult, or not only. Min-Jae appeared in the corridor behind him. He looked at the doorway, at Tae-sung's back. Something passed through his face that she was learning to read as the operational version of what other people showed as anger. Cold, precise, completely interior. "Tae-sung," he said. The older man turned. They looked at each other in the corridor, and she watched what passed between them. 11 years of something that wasn't friendship, but was its own complex category, now permanently altered. The geometry of it shifted and settled, and both of them knew the new shape. Tae-sung said something in Korean. Short. Min-Jae answered, one word. Tae-sung looked back at Evelyn one more time, nodded once, and this nod was different from the one in the penthouse, the one that had functioned as threat. This one had something reluctant and genuine in it. Then he walked away down the corridor and didn't look back. Min-Jae came into the room. "Done?" she said. "Done?" he said. He sat down across from her, and she saw in the way he sat, the slight easing, the minute relaxation of something that had been held for days, that it was truly done. "What did he say?" At the end, the one word. Min-Jae looked at her. "He said I had changed. I said yes." She held his gaze. "What did he mean by it?" "He meant it as an accusation," Min-Jae said. "I took it as a fact." She drank the last of her tea. It was cold. Richard moved another 9 million through the same channel before noon. Then 6 more through a secondary account that connected, when Min-Jae's people traced it, to 2 additional shell structures in the Cayman Islands that hadn't been in the original documents. The full architecture, appearing piece by piece like something being illuminated from below. The longer Richard thought the arrangement was real, the more he revealed in his attempts to protect himself. At 2 in the afternoon, the money stopped moving because Richard Hollis was no longer capable of moving it. The call came through channels she didn't have access to. Min-Jae took it privately, came back and told her in 3 sentences. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Chicago had executed a warrant on the information package that had been transmitted to them at 9:17 that morning by a source they would describe only as a foreign intelligence cooperative. Richard's accounts were frozen. His properties, the Lincoln Park house, 2 others she hadn't known about, were under a restraining order. He was in federal custody pending arraignment. Evelyn sat with that for a moment. "He'll get a lawyer," she said. "Yes," Min-Jae said. "A good one." "Yes." "Will it hold?" He looked at her steadily. "The documentation is complete. The transaction trail is complete. 3 separate forensic accounting firms have already confirmed its integrity. And," he paused, "the U.S. Attorney's Office has a second package, the one about your mother." She went very still. "The accident report from 2020, he said. "I had my people look at it when you told me about the phone call, the night in the mountains." He held her gaze. "There were inconsistencies in the original investigation. A witness who was interviewed once and not again. A mechanical assessment that was conducted by a firm with a previous consulting relationship to one of Richard's companies." He let her absorb that. "The Chicago field office has been given everything. It's a separate investigation. It takes longer, but it's open." She looked at her hands. The bandages from the first night were gone now, replaced with nothing. The cuts had closed and were healing, faint pink lines across both palms. She looked at them. "She's not coming back," Evelyn said. "No," Min-Jae said. "The investigation doesn't change that." "No," he said again. "It doesn't." She pressed her palms together slowly, felt the faint resistance of the healing skin. "But it happened," she said. "What he did. To her. To me. It's on a record somewhere now." "Yes," Min-Jae said. "It's on a record." She breathed, let the breath out completely. "Okay," she said. He didn't say anything. He understood, she thought, the particular shape of an okay that wasn't relief and wasn't peace and wasn't the end of something, but was the beginning of being able to carry it differently. He understood it the way people understood things they had learned not from being taught, but from having lived them. They sat together in the quiet office room for a while. The city outside continued. Somewhere in Chicago, Richard Hollis was in a federal holding room learning about the terms of his situation. Somewhere in this building, 3 senior men who had just confirmed the organizational removal of Jang Tae-sung were returning to their separate operations. Somewhere on the mountain outside Seoul, a hanok house with a broken front door was filling with rain through the gap. Min-Jae's side was hurting. She could see it in the way he was sitting, not dramatic, not seeking acknowledgement, just the quiet physical truth of a man whose body had been through something and was accounting for it. "You need to rest," she said. "I need to make 3 more calls," he said. "After the calls." He looked at her. The edge of something that was almost amusement, that narrow space where his humor lived when it surfaced. "You're managing me." "Someone has to," she said. "You're not good at it yourself." "I've managed fine for 36 years. You have a graze wound from a gun and a 2-day-old bruise on your face, and you ran 4 kilometers down a mountain this morning," she said. "Your definition of fine needs recalibration." He was quiet for a moment, then, 3 calls. "Then rest," she said. "Then rest," he agreed. It was the closest thing to an argument they'd had that wasn't about life or death. She noticed that, filed it somewhere that felt important. They moved that afternoon to a 3rd location, another property, this one inside the city, a low building in Mapo district that had the feeling of a place Min-Jae used often and did not share widely. 4 rooms, dark wood, a kitchen with an actual dining table, the kind of space where the walls had absorbed enough of someone's daily existence to feel inhabited rather than functional. She understood by evening that they would be here for a while, not hiding. The immediate threat had been neutralized, Tae-sung removed, Beck's leverage gone with the removal of the deal he'd been promised. But there were details. There were always details when you dismantled a structure as complex as the one Richard Hollis had built. And there were details in the reorganization of what Min-Jae's network looked like in the aftermath of Tae-sung's departure, and details took time. She didn't mind. She had nowhere else to be. Her passport was in a bag she'd packed in 20 minutes from a penthouse on the 41st floor, and she still had it, technically. She could go. The airport was 30 minutes from where they were sitting. She could get on a plane and land in Chicago and deal with the federal investigation from her own city and call her colleague and ask about the couch and begin rebuilding something. She thought about that, held it up and looked at it from all sides. Put it down. On the 3rd evening in the Mapo apartment, Min-Jae cooked. She hadn't known he could cook. She came into the kitchen at some point in the early evening drawn by smell, something with garlic and ginger and a dark stock, and found him at the stove with his jacket off and his sleeves up, moving through the kitchen with the same economy he moved through everything, not performing domesticity, but just doing it. A pot, a board with things on it, 2 bowls set on the counter in advance. She sat at the table and watched him without saying anything. He brought 2 bowls to the table and sat across from her, and they ate. Galbijim, braised short ribs and something that had been working for a long time based on the depth of it. She ate half the bowl before she said anything. "This is," she said. "My mother's recipe," he said, looking at his bowl. She looked at him. He had said 3 days ago in a different kitchen, "I won't talk about her." He had not said it this time. He had just placed the fact between them on the table with the food and let it sit there. "Tell me about her," she said, carefully. He was quiet for a moment. His spoon moved through the broth. "She was very small," he said. "Smaller than you. She had a way of walking through rooms like she'd memorized where everything was and didn't need to look." He paused. "She cooked when things were bad. Not because it fixed anything, because it was something she could control. Were things bad often? Yes, he said simply. Your father? Yes. She let that be. When did she die? Evelyn asked. 15 years ago, he said. I was 21. I was already inside the organization, already doing things. He looked at the bowl. She never asked me what I did. She understood, I think. She was a practical woman. Something moved in his face. She just kept cooking. And you kept the recipe. I kept the recipe, he said. They ate. The kitchen was warm and the evening outside the window was settling into night, and Seoul was doing what Seoul did, that relentless, luminous hum of a city that didn't have an off switch. From here it sounded almost like water, like something natural. Min-Jae, she said. He looked up. I don't know what comes next, she said. For me. Here. I don't have a plan. You don't need one immediately, he said. I'm not someone who does well without a plan. You did fairly well without one in a mountain forest at 3 a.m, he said. That was survival, she said. This is different. This is the part after survival. He held her gaze. What do you want it to look like? She thought about that, about the question and about the fact that he kept asking it, kept returning to what she wanted, kept giving her the space to answer, kept treating her answers as information rather than inconvenience. I want to stay, she said. For now. Until the Richard situation is settled enough that I understand what I'm returning to, if I return. She looked at him across the table, and I want to understand what this is. She stopped. Started again. I don't need it named. I just need it to be real, not managed, not strategic. He was very still. I don't know how to do this, he said, for the second time. But this time it sounded different. Not a confession of incapacity, but a statement of intent. A person acknowledging the distance of a thing they'd decided to cross anyway. I know, she said. Neither do I. I'll hurt you, he said. Not intentionally, but this life, the structure of it, it creates damage in the people near it. I've seen it. I've caused it without trying to. I'm not fragile, she said. I know you're not, he said. I watched you swing a concrete post at a man twice your size in the dark. I'm aware you're not fragile. The almost smile. I'm saying I have a history of being careless with the things I care about, not from cruelty, from not knowing how to treat them differently. Then learn, she said. He looked at her. I'm not going anywhere immediately, she said. You have time to learn. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside the city hummed. Inside the kitchen was warm with the smell of his mother's recipe and the comfortable wreckage of a shared meal and the specific kind of quiet that settled between two people who had been through something together and were still sitting at the same table. Okay, he said. She nodded. They finished eating. She washed the bowls and he dried them, which was not something she'd anticipated, and she found herself standing at a kitchen sink in Seoul washing dishes with a man who ran the Korean underworld and thinking that the complete strangeness of her life at this moment was not as frightening as it should have been. That something had recalibrated in her in the last 9 days about what frightening meant and where her tolerance for it sat. She had run through an alley in a wedding dress. She had sat in a mountain house and learned that her mother's death was not an accident. She had hit a man with a piece of infrastructure in the dark. She had answered her stepfather's phone call and set the mechanism of his undoing in motion and felt her hand not shake once while she did it. She was still herself. That was the thing she kept returning to. She had not become someone else in order to survive this. She had become a more complete version of what she'd always been. The version that had been available to her all along in that fear and accommodation and 4 years of living in Richard Hollis's carefully managed orbit had compressed into something smaller than its actual dimensions. She was the same size she'd always been. She just knew it now. 3 weeks passed in the apartment before Min-Jae told her about Richard. The federal case had moved with the speed that cases move when the documentation is ironclad and the government has significant institutional motivation. Richard Hollis had hired the best lawyer available, which told them nothing about his innocence and everything about his resources, and the lawyer had identified 3 procedural challenges to the initial warrant, all of which had been reviewed and rejected. The money laundering charges were primary. The connection to Baek's network was primary. The 4 million and the 9 million and the 6 million, all of it traced, documented, witnessed. And the other investigation, the one about her mother. That moved slower, the way those things always moved slower, but it moved. A witness re-interviewed, a second mechanical assessment conducted. A firm whose previous relationship with one of Richard's companies was now itself under scrutiny for the scope of its involvement. Min-Jae told her all of this at the dining table on a Tuesday evening with a folder of documents between them and 2 cups of coffee going cold. "He's going to plead," Min-Jae said. "His lawyer has made contact with the federal office. They're negotiating terms." "He'll get less time if he pleads," she said. "Yes. Less time in exchange for full cooperation on the Baek network connections," she said, "which means he gives them everything." "Yes," Min-Jae said, "which is useful to us, or to the U.S. government, which in this instance are not in conflict." She looked at the folder. She didn't open it. "The other investigation," she said. "My mother." "That's separate from the plea," he said. "If the mechanical evidence holds, and the second assessment supports the original anomalies, that charge comes after, independent of whatever cooperation he provides on the financial case." "So he could cooperate fully on everything," she said. "Give them Baek on a platter, reduce his financial sentence, and still face a separate charge." "Yes," Min-Jae said, "if the evidence supports it." "And you think it does?" "I think a mechanic was paid to produce a report that said something different from what he found," Min-Jae said carefully. "And I think the man who paid him has a documented history of arranging for problems in his life to be resolved through channels that are difficult to trace." He looked at her. "I think it supports it." She looked at her hands, at the healed lines across her palms, at the table that had become, over 3 weeks, the center of something that had the shape of a life. "She would have left him," Evelyn said. "My mother. She was building toward it. I could see it, the last few months. She was saving money. She'd called a lawyer, once, I found out later." She looked at the coffee cup. "He knew it too. I think that's why." "Yes," Min-Jae said. "I think so." "She was trying to get out and he removed the problem," she said. "The way he removes problems. Through channels that are difficult to trace." She looked up. "The same way he thought he was removing me." The room was very quiet. "He didn't succeed with you," Min-Jae said. "No," she said. "He didn't." Min-Jae slid the folder aside, reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. Not gripping, just present. The way he did things. Without ceremony, without performance, just the fact of the gesture placed between them and left there to be whatever it was. She turned her hand over under his, felt the wrongness of his knuckles under her palm, all those old breaks. "I want to be there," she said, "when he's sentenced, whatever the final charges are. I want to be in that room." "You will be," he said. "I need you to make sure of it." "I will make sure of it," he said. She believed him, without qualification, which was not something she'd been capable of with anyone in a very long time and which she felt the weight of, not as a burden, but as the specific gravity of something real. The weeks that followed had a texture she hadn't expected. Not drama, not the sustained crisis energy that had shaped the first 9 days, just life. The strange, ordinary life of being inside a world that was not ordinary, lived with a person who was not ordinary, and finding that the shape of a day could be both those things and still contain the rhythms she'd always needed. Coffee in the morning. Work. She began doing work, remote consulting for a contact in Chicago who didn't know or ask about her situation, and the ordinary usefulness of it was something she hadn't known she needed until she had it back. Walking in the evenings, sometimes alone, sometimes not. The city becoming, in increments, something she knew rather than something that had tried to kill her. Min-Jae's world moved around her and she moved around it. Shiva learned the names of the people in it, learned what could be asked and what couldn't and where the lines were without having them explained. She came to understand the difference between the things Min-Jae controlled and the things he managed and the things he simply had to live with. And she understood that those categories existed for her too, in her own life, and always had. She was not naive about what he was. She had seen the whiteboard. She knew what the lines meant. She understood that the renovation of his empire, the changes he was making to how it operated, who it touched, what it permitted, were real changes and also incomplete ones, and would remain incomplete, and that the world he was building was better than the one he'd inherited and still not clean. She held that without pretending it wasn't there. And she held the other thing too, the way he was with her, the way he kept asking what she wanted, the way he cooked at midnight because she couldn't sleep, the way he had stood on a mountain ridge with a gun and a graze wound and told her the truth about Tae-sung and let it be what it was, the way he had opened a car door in the rain, 6 weeks after Seoul. She was standing at the window of the apartment in Mapo in the early evening, watching the street below fill with the specific quality of light that came just before dark in this city, pink and amber bleeding into the haze, the signs beginning to wake up, the whole organism of Seoul shifting into its night self. She had a cup of tea. She was thinking about nothing in particular. Min-Jae came in from somewhere. She heard the door, heard him moving through the apartment in that way he had. No unnecessary noise, no announcement of himself, just present. He came and stood beside her at the window. They were quiet for a while. "Richard took the plea," he said. She nodded. She'd been expecting it. 12 years federal, he said. Cooperation agreement on the Beck connection. Full asset forfeiture. He paused. The second investigation is pending trial. Separate timeline. Will you tell me when that one settles? Yes, he said. She looked at the city, the pink light deepening. Thank you, she said, for the second investigation. You would have found it yourself, he said. Eventually. Maybe, she said, but you found it first. He was quiet. You carry it well, he said. Everything that happened. You don't seem crushed by it. I'm not crushed, she said. I just found out that crushed is something you can function inside of. She looked at the teacup. You know that. You've known it longer than I have. He looked at her. She felt it without turning. I have a question, he said. She turned. He was looking at her with that directness that was simply the default state of him. No performance, no management of approach, just the question coming at her straight. Ask it, she said. What do you want this to be, he said. Going forward. Not vague. Specifically. She looked at him. At the city going amber and pink behind him, and the lines of his face in that light, and the hands at his sides that she had memorized, the wrongness of the knuckles, and the stillness of them. I want to stay in Seoul, she said. For now. I want to see how the Richard situation resolves, and I want to deal with what comes after that from here, instead of from Chicago, because Chicago is not where I'm from. It's where I lived. There's a difference. He nodded once. And I want this, she said. Whatever this is, I want to keep finding out what it is. She held his gaze. I don't need a specific shape for it. I just need it to be honest. Can you do that? I can do that, he said, without hesitation. And when you can't, when something in your world makes it complicated or compromised, I need you to tell me instead of managing it. He was quiet for a moment. That's harder, he said. I know, she said. I'm asking anyway. The almost smile, the shape it left behind. Yes, he said. I can do that. She turned back to the window. The light had shifted again. Fully amber now, the pink gone. Soul burning gold in its own reflection. She thought about a wedding dress in a Chicago garment bag, about a chartered flight in an SUV with tinted windows and a man in a room who had looked at her like she was a delivery. She thought about running, about the specific feeling of running in bare feet through water and dark with no direction except away. She didn't feel like running now. Min-Jae, she said. Yes. The first night, in the alley. She was still looking at the city. When I asked you to hide me. Yes. You said you recognized the look, being hunted. She turned. What does it look like? He considered that, looking at her steadily. It looks like someone who has been running so long, he said quietly, that they've stopped believing the running will end. He paused. Like they're not asking to be saved. They're asking for one moment of not being caught. Just one. His voice was even, unhurried. You weren't asking for rescue. You were asking for shelter. There's a difference. Is that why you opened the door? That's part of it, he said. What's the other part? He was quiet for a moment. The city burned behind her. You looked at me, he said, like I was a place you could stop. She held his gaze. Something moved through her chest. Not relief, not warmth, something older and more structural. The feeling of a weight that had been carried so long it had stopped announcing itself, suddenly declaring its own presence, and with it the knowledge that it was possible to set it down. She stepped toward him. He didn't move back or adjust or manage the distance between them. He was simply where he was, present in the specific way that was particular to him, and she reached up and put her hand against his jaw. The left side, where the cut had been, healed now to nothing, and felt him breathe under her palm. Thank you, she said, for opening the door. He turned his face slightly into her hand, the smallest motion, the least managed thing she had ever seen from him. Thank you, he said quietly, for getting in. Outside, Seoul moved through its evening in 10,000 directions at once, indifferent and luminous and continuous, the way cities are, alive in the aggregate, particular in none of its parts, running on the accumulated motion of lives that didn't know each other and didn't need to. Up here, in the amber light of a room that had become something she recognized, two people stood at a window and held what they'd built out of disaster and chose it anyway. Not because it was simple, not because it was safe or clean or something she would have chosen at 24 or 26 or even 28, arriving at Incheon in an SUV with no idea what was waiting. Because it was real. Because they were both still standing. Because she had run through the dark toward a car door held open by a stranger, and the stranger had turned out to be the most honest person she'd ever met, which was something she was still not done understanding. The gold light faded. The neon took its place, Seoul becoming itself again in its other register, bright and loud and relentless and alive. Evelyn Carter stood in it and did not run. For the first time in a very long time, she was exactly where she had chosen to be.